Before I start sharing my screen, I want to bring you up to date. We are, as some of you may have guessed who are math geniuses, we have, with our 25th meeting, thus completed 6 months, 24 meetings of our course. And it's taken us this long to get to the beginning of the Baha'i Faith. So even as the Báb is called the primal point, precisely because he is the beginning, the point of beginning, but also the point of ending. So I think it fitting that we recognize this class session as also the point of the ending of our going over, however cursorily, the other previous, the main Abrahamic religions. There's some we don't know much about. And I think it will stand us in good stead as we compare in our minds when we go through the study of the Baha'i Faith, its history, its teachings, its text, and so forth, that we appreciate what we have insofar as both the authoritative evidence of everything that occurred. We have photographs of the manifestation. We're not going to show them on the PowerPoint, but we know they exist. We know not only where the manifestation is buried, but where the successor, Abdu'l-Báb, is buried. And in effect, we can appreciate by comparison the confusion. You know, it occurs to me how excited the mother of Constantine got when she thought she had found a piece of the true cross. This was her mission in life, was to go back to the Holy Land and to find a piece of the true cross. And of course, the church, as it proceeded, would have these reliquaries, which were little boxes placed in sacred places that were perhaps a finger of one of the apostles or something of this sort. Well, we don't have to guess about the history of the faith. We have it all documented. And so I encourage you, even though we're going to go in fairly decent detail as we go through the history and major incidences, we're going to obviously have to skip over some things, because if we look at the dawn breakers here, this whole volume covers only the first 8 years, 9 years is in this one volume of Nabil. It's extremely rich, and it's well worth, if you haven't read it, it's something that was important enough that it was one of the first things that Shoghi Effendi, as guardian, did, was to translate this work. And of course, you also have the Guardian's centenary gift to the English-speaking community, God Passes By. He also wrote a similar volume in Persian. And so that's another repository of the history, a lot more selective than the Dawnbreakers, but extremely valuable. And you can tell what was particularly important by the way that the Guardian selected things. There's two other books I want to call to your attention you may not be familiar with that I would strongly recommend. And one is this book called A Basic Baha'i Chronology. It's been out for some time. It's some 500 pages long. And it's mostly a reference book, you would think. You look up a date and it has a good index. So if you want to see a particular letter of the living or so on, and when they were born and when a certain thing happened, it's wonderfully put together. This is of George Ronald Press. And then another item out of George Ronald I also find extremely valuable, though my book is rather tattered, which is a good sign for a reference book to be tattered, called A Basic Baha'i Dictionary. So if you want to know, well, what is the Qaim? What does that word mean? Or the Qayyum, or Masrat al-Azka, Hazrat al-Quds, or Mashriq al-Azkar, and so forth. So these are very helpful in your study, along with other volumes that you may be familiar with, such as the 4-volume study by Tahirzadeh, the 3 volumes of Baluzi on the 3 figures of the Báb, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul-Baha. And then also Baluzi does some other work as well. So there's so much valuable information and so much still to be translated and published. So there are translation teams working for the House, for the World Center, producing constantly new translations of the work of Baha'u'llah and the Báb and Abdul-Baha and so on. So we are so fortunate. And so I think what we've done for the last 6 months was interesting in itself, insofar as supporting our belief as Baha'is in the concept of progressive revelation, and the comparison, as we saw last week, that before each revelation you have 2 categories of symbols. You have the visible heavens, the star symbolizing our presaging or foreshadowing the advent of the manifestation. And then you have the visible stars, as Baha'u'llah calls this in his discussion of it in the Kitab-i-Igan. And that, of course, was Sheikh Ahmad, who began the Sheikhi movement, and Sayyid Kazim, his student and successor. And then, of course, when he was a few days from dying, he dispersed his students and told them to go find the promised one. So tonight we're focusing on the birth of the Baha'i Faith on May 23rd, 1844, which, as I say, is both the point of the ending of the Adamic Cycle or Prophetic Cycle, and the beginning of the Baha'i Cycle. Now, there's 2 terms. There's the Baha'i Cycle and the Baha'i Era. We've talked about this a long time ago, but you may have forgotten. The Baha'i Era is a term designating a dispensation. So the Baha'i Era is the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which Baha'u'llah tells us will endure at least 1,000 years, maybe many more years. But the point is at least that before another manifestation appears. The Baha'i Cycle, on the other hand, is a much longer period. And so the Baha'i Cycle, we are told, will endure not less than 500,000 years, quite a long time, but not a long time insofar as the history of the planet is concerned. So the objective, as we know, of this era, the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, is to bring unity to the planet Earth by introducing administrative order, political polity, a global polity that will embrace the planet as a whole and bring us together with under this umbrella of the same religion, though, as Muhammad said, there'll be no compulsion in that. You don't have to be a Baha'i, but it will eventually become, because it, if you'll think about it, it embraces all the previous religions. It validates them. And a single language as an auxiliary language, a single script, a single system of weights and measures, and so on. But we'll get to those things as need be. Right now, let me share my screen, and we'll begin the slides tonight, which are relatively few in number, but very poignant, I think, for a number of reasons. We'll also include a brief part of what is a very nicely put together uh, video, which I've had on another site, and you can look at it independently if you wish. And that is a pilgrimage to the house of the Báb. It's a very old video, necessarily so, because the house of the Báb was destroyed. And so fortunately, this video, which is saying, here's what you'll see when you go on pilgrimage to the house of the Báb. And my brother and his wife were fortunate enough to go there. Maybe some of you have too, before it was destroyed in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution. So, class Fireside number 25, the declaration of the Báb, the primal point. And of course, this primal point has other meanings other than just a point in time of beginning, the primal point from which creation is generated, and it has a lot of symbolic meanings. And we'll deal with some of those as we come upon them. This is just repeating what I just said, but it's there for you to keep if you download the PDF form of the slides on my website. Read all the introductory materials the Guardian has included for his translation of the Dawnbreakers. Be especially attentive to the ample portrayal of the culture and government of Persia during this period. Now, this is all in the introduction to the Dawnbreakers. It's extremely rich and valuable. And to the information about the expectations in Shia Islam. We looked at some of that last time, and of course, the Shaikhi movement was a particular branch, if you will, of Shiism that was very specifically predicting the advent of the hidden Imam or the 12th Imam. Some interesting things you will see occur as one of the first of the letters of the living had the job assigned to him by the Báb of going to make contact with the head of the Shaikhi movement. No more need to speculate, only the need to muster the will to study independently on a regular basis. It's nice to have these classes where we can talk about these things and survey them, but nothing takes the place of your own study. And of course, all the materials are online, or you can buy them, or you can also have ebooks of almost everything we're talking about. Now, this is one of the more fascinating facts. We mentioned this very early in our discussion of progressive revelation because it's applicable to every manifestation. So let me just read this from Shoghi Effendi's letter in the Advent of Divine Justice. In the light of this fundamental principle, and the principle he's alluding to is the idea that the manifestations don't appear where things are going well or the most spiritual place. On the contrary, they go to where the contrast between what's happening and what they are teaching is most profound, so that they can demonstrate the power and efficacy of their teachings to transform a people that are in a state of depravity, particularly not necessarily physically or culturally, but spiritual depravity. So that's the principle to which he's alluding here. In the light of this fundamental principle, it should always be borne in mind, nor can it be sufficiently emphasized, that the primary reason why the Báb and Baha'u'llah chose to appear in Persia and to make it the first repository of their revelation was because of all the peoples and nations of the civilized world, that race and nation had, as so often depicted by Abdu'l-Báb, sunk to such ignominious depths and manifested so great a perversity as to find no parallel among its contemporaries. For no more convincing proof could be adduced demonstrating the regenerating spirit animating the revelations proclaimed by the Báb and Baha'u'llah, then their power to transform what can be truly regarded as one of the most backward, the most cowardly, and perverse of the peoples into a race of heroes, fit to effect in turn a similar revolution in the life of mankind. So it doesn't mean we should think this way of Persians today. It's saying, in effect, this same people was transformed into a race of heroes by the influence of the Báb and Baha'u'llah. And of course, we see that in the Persians who were the letters of the living, the Persians who were the martyrs, and the Persians who most recently during the 10-year World Crusade were some of the principal emissaries teaching the faith in all of the distant lands. Mulla Husayn. Now, we talked about this last week, but we're going to just recoup a little bit. Mulla Husayn, a brilliant scholar and follower of Sid Kazim Rushdie, after the death of his teacher in 1843, prayed and fasted for 40 days before setting out from Karbala to find the promised one. He then set out from Karbala with his young brother and young nephew, both of whom became letters of the living, and felt drawn to the travel to Shiraz. After sending the other two ahead, and that is his brother and his young nephew, Mulla Husayn waited at the city gate, whereupon he was approached by a stranger wearing a green turban, which indicated that the wearer was descended from the Prophet Muhammad. The stranger, Sayyid Ali Muhammad, welcomed Mulla Husayn to Shiraz and offered him hospitality in his house. Mulla Husayn left them then and went out of the city and prepared himself to search excuse me, I'm sorry, this is out of sync. This is what he did before he left. And prepared himself to search by retiring to a mosque for 40 days. Now, this is the preparation before he left for Shiraz. He spent this time in fasts and vigils, contemplation and prayer. When he was ready, he went to Bushir on the Persian Gulf. Probably he chose Persia because of the prophecy, the ministers and upholders of his faith shall be of the people of Persia. And that's from the Prophet Muhammad. That's from the Quran. Down the centuries, I'm not sure it's from the Quran, it may be Hadith. Down the centuries, hidden in a mass of sacred traditions, had come other specific references to the promised one, the date of his arising, which was to be the year 60, which is 1260 AH, after Hajira, of the Muslim calendar, or 1844. His lineage, his age, his personal appearance, even his name, for the prophecy stated, in his name, the name of the guardian, which is another title for Ali, the first Imam, proceedeth that of the Prophet Muhammad. And so his name, of course, Sayyid, descendant of Muhammad, Ali Muhammad. And this is a quote from Marzieh Gale's work, Dawn over Mount Hira, which is an older work, but still very useful. Marzieh Gale was a wonderful scholar, studied at Stanford and translated, along with her father, the first edition of the Seven Valleys and Four Valleys, and the revision of those works that have now come out are mostly very little change from what she did. The Persian chronicler Nabil writes that when Mulla Husayn was in Bushir, he smelled the fragrance of the promised one, and that he was drawn as if by a magnet towards the north to the city of Shiraz. It was May, and the city is one which surpasses the descriptive powers of even Persian poets. Hafiz, tongue of the invisible, the poet, says that not in paradise itself will you find the edges of its brooks, nor its flowering plants. It lies in a long green plain, a city of sky blue domes and long gardens. Snow mountains hem it round. It is crisscrossed by lines of purple Judas trees and black cypresses, and in May its mild air is a blend of orange blossoms and roses. Mulla Husayn was walking outside the gate of the city when a stranger approached and greeted him. The mullah, who in spite of his youth in a country that favored age, was widely known and honored, took him for some disciple of Sayyid Kazim's. The stranger was a descendant of the Prophet. He wore a green turban. There was a special luminous quality about him. Perhaps it was his young manly beauty or the immaculacy of his clothing. In any case, he seemed to shine in the slanting afternoon sun. The stranger invited Mulla Husayn to his home. The mullah demurred, saying that his traveling companions were waiting for him at the mosque. But the stranger as courteously insisted, just in other words, just as courteously insisted that he go. His presence, his gait, his vibrant tones exerted a powerful influence on Mulla Husayn, who could not but follow him. They went through a lane and came to a wooden door set in a wall of a sun-baked brick wall. An Ethiopian attendant. Now, this Ethiopian attendant is named later. Very interesting figure. Goes with him on his pilgrimage of the Báb, which he sets out to do after the other letters of the living, the 17 letters of the living, other than Mulla Husayn, have found him over the next 40 days. As they crossed the threshold, the young host repeated some words from the Quran. Enter therein, he said, in peace, secure. The mullah's spirits lifted. He could not tell why. This is the Khazareen Gate going into Shiraz, and it's as I understand it, you see the mountains here in the background, the snow-capped mountains. But this gate, I think, is similar to the gate to which, or through which Mulla Husayn, or at which Mulla Husayn met the Báb. It was later destroyed. We know where it was, but it no longer exists. But as you will see, these gates are beautifully set up with a room on the top containing a Quran. You'll see that later. This is the door to the house of the Báb. And this is the upper room. Here is the room itself in which the revelation to Mulla Husayn took place. And down here and here, there are two courtyards. This is the outer courtyard, and this is the inner courtyard. And you'll see there are oranges. You may not be able to detect them. There are oranges on this orange tree. And two stories that are worth mentioning here. One is that that pilgrims were, needless to say, fond of sneaking out of the country with some of the seeds, or at least maybe even one of the oranges in their pockets. So that tree now has its little trees from that same fruit all over the world. A second thing about the tree is that when this building was destroyed purposely because it represented the Babi Faith, and the government and the revolutionary government tore it down, it is told and apparently verified, though I'm conveying it to you by word of mouth, and I'm not seeing it written down, but I was assured it was true, that they paved all this over with to make a parking lot, and that this orange tree actually poked through the asphalt. I presume they probably destroyed it afterward, but symbolically, needless to say, we all pass that story around very quickly. This is the incredible beauty of the room in which the Báb held converse with Mulla Husayn. And there is in this the full video. We're just going to see a little bit of it. A description of some of the symbolic meanings of these etchings and reliefs on the wall and on the cornice here. Mulla Husayn told the young man about his search for the Promised One. When Ali Muhammad asked how Sayyid Kazim's followers would recognize the Promised One, Mulla Husayn repeated Sayyid Kazim's description. Citing the guidance from Sayyid Kazim Rushdie, Mulla Husayn said, he is of pure lineage, is of illustrious descent, and of the seed of Fatima. As to his age, he is more than 20 and less than 30. He is endowed with innate knowledge. And of course, this is very important, the innate knowledge part. And we see that in the early years of stories of the Bab and of Baha'u'llah, that the teachers were dumbfounded and even said they couldn't teach this person anything. And we know that from some of the stories that we'll get to later of the childhood of the Bab. He is of medium height, abstains from smoking, and is free from bodily deficiency. That becomes important in another story. Sayyid Ali Muhammad then said, behold, all these signs are manifest in me. And then we have what we mentioned last time, the two personal tests that Mulla Husayn had in his own mind that would sort of finalize the proof that this was indeed the one for whom he was searching. The first was a treatise and these are the words of Mulla Husayn himself. The first was a treatise which I had myself composed, bearing upon the abstruse and hidden teachings propounded by Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim. Whoever seemed to me capable of unraveling the mysterious allusions made in that treatise, to him I would next submit my second request. And as we said last time, that request is as follows, again, as revealed in the words by Mulla Husayn. So again, isn't it wonderful that we don't have hadiths, or we don't have clues or various versions of these stories. We have the original text itself. I would ask him to reveal without the least hesitation or reflection a commentary on the Surah of Joseph in a style and language entirely different from the prevailing standards of the time. Sayyid Ali Muhammad fulfilled both requirements, revealing the entire Surah of Mulk, whereupon Mulla Husayn declared his belief in his host profession. Now, the Surah of Mulk is the first part of the Qayyum al-Asma, the commentary on the Surah of Joseph. And the figure of Joseph, as we said before, becomes a very important figure. In general, Joseph foreshadows the life of Baha'u'llah, the long lost Joseph. O thou who art the first to believe in me, verily I say, I am the Bab, the gate of God, and thou art the Babu'l-Báb, the gate of that gate. 18 souls must in the beginning spontaneously and of their own accord accept me and recognize the truth of my revelation. Unwarned, uninvited, each of these must seek independently to find me. And when their number is complete, one of them must needs be chosen to accompany me on my pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. There I shall deliver the message of God to the Sharif of Mecca. And next time we'll go into that pilgrimage. It's a very interesting story. And one of the things that you need to be aware of, and if you've read the Dawnbreakers before, you know this for yourself. There's so many stories, and that's why one reason on first reading it's so hard to read Nabil, because he will go off on a digression of a story which goes ahead chronologically, and then you go back to the main narrative of the story of the Babi Faith. And at first I thought this was just amateurish writing because he wasn't a professional historian. I don't know if there were any back then. But the point is that there would be no other way to do it than the way he does. And it all hooks together little by little in such an interesting way. So you have the story of that we will see next time of his trip to Mecca and Medina as the, if you will, return of Muhammad to say, I have come. Isn't that incredible? That it would be equivalent, if you will, to Muhammad going to the Holy Land and saying that he was the return of Christ, of course, something he was not able to do. And then you have, of course, the story of Mulla Husayn going to Tehran to deliver the letter to him whom God will make manifest, which turns out to be Baha'u'llah. There's that story. There's the story of another of the letters of the living, who is given the charge of going to the head of the Shaykhi community and telling him that the prophecies of Sheikh Ahmad have come true. Very interesting story there. I then shall return to Kufa, where again in the masjid is a mosque, of that holy city, I shall manifest his cause. It is incumbent upon you not to divulge either to your companions or to any other soul that which you have seen and heard. Be engaged in the Masjid il-Khani in prayer and in teaching. I too will there join you in congregational prayer. Beware lest your attitude towards me betray the secret of your faith. You should continue in this occupation and maintain this attitude until our departure for Hijaz. Now, if you remember, we know what Hijaz is because we studied the life of Muhammad, and Hijaz is that area of the Arabian Peninsula that Muhammad lived in. Ere we depart, we shall appoint unto each of the 18 souls his special mission, and shall send them forth to accomplish their task. We shall instruct them to teach the word of God and to quicken the souls of men. Having spoken these words to me, he dismissed me from his presence. We're now going to see this a brief part of this video, only 5 or 10 minutes of it, but I think you will enjoy it. Now you can see the room here built above the entrance is where they have a large Quran, and this will be described in the video. So let me begin this.
The gate of the Quran is a fitting entry into Shiraz, for was not the promised Ga'en manifested therein? The room above the gate enshrines a massive Quran, placed there to bring the blessing of peace and the knowledge of the will of God to those entering the city. Beyond the gate spreads Shiraz, an expanse of low buildings. In their midst, the sacred house, where began the supreme spiritual drama of our time.
In the year 1844, from the port of Bushehr on the Persian Gulf, came another pilgrim, afoot, guided by spiritual intuition, to Shiraz. In this spot, where yesterday stood the Kazaroon Gate, Mulla Husayn Abu Shruye met a youth of radiant countenance, Sayyid Ali Muhammad, and was invited to his home. Walking through the crooked street, they passed by the Il-Khani Mosque, where Mulla Husayn's brother and nephew awaited him. Traversing the narrow cobbled lanes of the obscure Shamshir-Garan quarter, they came to the door of a modest house. At a knock, an Ethiopian servant opened the door, whereupon the Bab, addressing his guest, uttered the Quranic verse, "Enter therein in peace, secure."
Today, the pilgrim passes the door, and, rounding the corner, enters a dwelling which has been prepared to receive the pilgrims to the house. pilgrim emerges into its courtyard. He crosses to a door which pierces the far wall, glimpsing for the first time the charming small court of the Blessed Bab's house. At this wondrous threshold, some of the friends, giving thanks for the bounty of attainment to this sacred spot, may even wish to bend in homage or kiss the shallow sill. The courtyard of the Bab's house is tiny, with a diminutive pool and an old orange tree planted by the Bab himself. On three sides are the rooms of a simple U-shaped dwelling. In the corner at the left is the household well, which still supplies cool, sweet water. Standing at that threshold, with a feeling of unutterable joy, one's eyes turn upward to the fateful upper room where, long ago, the Bab entertained his honored guest. Across the narrow court and up 3 steps, into the side hallway. At the left is the room of the Bab's widowed mother, empty save for a lingering memory of her presence. To the right of the hallway, the Bab's narrow sitting room opens onto the courtyard through ceiling-high windows. Adjacent is the interior living room, once occupied by the Bab's beloved wife, Khadija Khanum. The back stairway is steep and narrow, typical of Persian houses of that day, but it rises to the place of revelation. At the doorway of the room, the pilgrim may pause, as do the Persian believers, to recite a prayer revealed for this holy place. I testify with my tongue and my soul, with all my heart and my limbs, that this is the spot before which all the denizens of his kingdom, and beyond them the inhabitants of the realm of creation, bow down in adoration. This is the spot where every day the inmates of the crimson chambers sweep the threshold clean, and the company of his favored angels dust it with their locks of spirit.
Through this door the Bab entered and made his learned and esteemed guest at home. Seating themselves, the Bab poured the water for Mulla Husayn's ablutions, then offered him a refreshing beverage and himself prepared the tea, after which they shared evening prayers. About an hour after sunset, the Bab began to give to Mulla Husayn the proofs that he was that man of unsurpassed holiness, whose cause would be initiated by none other than the Lord of the Age. Beneath this ceiling sat the 2 young men, he who was the new revealer, and he who was the first disciple. On that lamplit evening, the blessed Bab presented clear proofs of his mission, and confirmed the teachings of Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazem. In that room, he revealed what was to become the initial chapter of his first, greatest, and mightiest work, the Qayyum al-Asma. This commentary on the Surah of Joseph from the Quran predicted the divine Joseph, who was soon to fulfill the promise of God. On that night of nights, at the 3rd hour after sunset, God's new manifestation broke bread with his disciple, and the night fled away to dawn in the outpouring of the new revelation. It was the dawn of arousal of all men from their spiritual slumbers, the hour when the voice of Gabriel from the tongue of Mulla Husayn cried out, "Awake, for lo, the morning light is broken, and the promised one is come." Then, as daybreak became sunrise, Mulla Husayn, the Babu'l-Báb, the gate of the gate, transformed, bemused, left his beloved, and descended the 9 steps up which he had come the night before, that supernal night which marked the coming of a new spiritual age. At the foot of the stairs he stepped through the door into the humdrum street. The great adventure of a new faith was begun, utterly compelling, gloriously dangerous, at stake the future of mankind.